Hey there everybody, NecroVMX here, and it's time for a very special feature that I'm going to be doing, over the next few weeks and such. I'm going to be doing one of these videos every now and then. It's a look at the history of the Nintendo consoles, and today we're going to be taking a look at the very first Nintendo console, the Nintendo Entertainment System, also known as the NES. So there it is. This is the NES. This sucker pretty much defined my childhood, and this is actually my childhood NES. I got this when I was 9 years old, which, if you think about it, was 19 years ago, so this sucker is basically an antique as far as video games are concerned. I've since had to replace, some other consoles like my Super NES, but I still have the original NES. Now, the NES is interesting because, mostly because of its design and its innovation. The design is basically, the whole thing, the hardware behind it is based off of a Japanese system called the Famicom, or Family Computer. Now, in America, we had issues with video games in 1985 when this came out. In 1984, and to a lesser extent in 83, we had a video game crash. Now, what that meant was that the market was getting saturated with poor product. You didn't, back in those days, if you wanted to buy a game, you couldn't look up a review. You couldn't go online. There was no internet that, was worth anything in those days. You couldn't even get a magazine and read reviews there. You pretty much, if you didn't know somebody who had a game or could recommend one, you pretty much just had to go to the store, pick out a game, look at the cover, look at the back of it, and hope for the best. So you buy, you take it home, you pop it in your Atari or your ColecoVision or your Intellivision or whatever the fuck you had, and then if you find out it's a piece of shit or a blatant clone of another game that you already have, you were fucked. Well, basically what happened is the whole market crashed and video games were no longer a viable source of entertainment in America because basically they were doomed. And it looked like it was something that was going to be considered a passing fad and that wouldn't be alive anymore. Imagine that. They thought video games were done for. Well, Nintendo changed all that with the NES. They designed it in a way that it was differentiated from many of the consoles of the time so that it was more seen as not a video game console, but an entertainment console that just happened to play video games. One thing that they did was they had it come with a robot, and they really marketed the robot more than the console, which is kind of interesting. Another thing is the design of how you put the games in. Most video games that use cartridges, this is an example of an NES cartridge, this is Final Fantasy, you would put the cartridge down into the system. The Ataris did that, the ColecoVision did that, the Intellivision did that, they all fucking did that. This, where you put the game in like this, and then you could also push it down to lock it into place, made it more like either a computer disk or really more relevant, more like a VCR, which led a lot of older people to refer to these as tapes instead of cartridges. As a matter of fact, you'll hear a lot of older people still say that to this day, Nintendo tapes. So basically, that's how you'd get the game in. You just push it in, and you could also push it down unless you got something attached to it like a Game Genie, and it had this cool little lid. You didn't have to see the game. They called this the control deck, and things like that led people to believe that this wasn't just a video game console. This was just something that goes with the home entertainment system. Even the name of it, Nintendo Entertainment System. It doesn't have the word video in it. It doesn't have the word game in it. There's no numbers in it. So that makes you think, less of video games and more of like something that goes along with a television. Something that goes in your entertainment unit. An entertainment system. Let's take a look at the design of the actual console. Now, the Famicom, or Family Computer, was mostly white and red. Here we have gray, darker gray, and black. And a little bit of orange for the lettering. This is the power button. You use that to turn the console on, and there's a little light there that would go on when the console's on. It also had a reset button, so you can just go back to the title screen of your game without having to actually turn the game on and off. Here are the controller ports, and there's two of them, so you can play two-player games. I'll get to the controllers in a minute. We can take a look at the one side, and we have the audio-video. Notice there's only two of them. There's not red, white, and yellow like we're used to these days. Actually, even the red, white, and yellow is considered to be kind of outdated because a lot of people use Super Video and Composite and HD and shit like this. But check it out, one for audio and one for video. That's because that was before stereo TVs were really anything of note. The other side of the console really doesn't have anything. The back of it is has where you put the RF switch, which is a alternative to the AV. You didn't get as high quality, but it worked with most of the televisions at the time. This is your channel 3 and 4 switch. You can have the NES work on channel 3 or channel 4. Man, that's outdated. And then that's where the power cable goes. Then there's the bottom of the console, which most people never looked at, but there's something interesting. There's this panel here that you can actually take off. They never actually use this for anything. There's this second panel here, which I assume is something that you would snap off based on the way it looks, and then there's probably some sort of input there. The Japanese version, the Famicom, had an add-on called the Famicom Disk System that used floppy disks, and a lot of games were released for that. And I think that was the possibility of localizing the Famicom Disk System, or having some sort of other peripheral to go along with the NES. The top of it is really not all that interesting. One thing is that it has the vents on the top, which is another archaic design. Usually the vents would be on the sides or on the back. You know, the sides is probably the best place to have a vent. And this led to the vents being clogged with dust. As a matter of fact, you can see there's some old dust in there. Yeah, it's pretty dusty. I already showed you one of the games, Final Fantasy. I'll just grab a couple of other NES games from back... Oh, not from back there. That's Super NES. I'm just going to grab a couple of random NES games just to show you. That's Super Glove Ball. That was designed for use with the Power Glove, which I don't have. That's a shitty game. There's Shadowgate. That was pretty fun. I'm going to do a playthrough of that sometime in the fairly soon future. There's a casino game, Vegas Dreams. And here's a shooting game, Dragon Spirit. Notice these little protective cases. This was to protect the games from like dust and shit like that. And what's interesting is that most of them just look like this, but then the ones for first-party games said Nintendo right across it. So let's put those back. Oh, there's one that says Nintendo. Let me grab that. See? That's Tetris 2 that's in there. I really don't think that you really needed those things, but what can you do? You know? I can't seem to get these back the way they were because the fucking N64 cartridges are getting in the way. Alright, Banjo-Kazooie needs to get out of there because it's pissing me off. Alright, so really... Hi! The only thing left to show you about the NES is one of the controllers, and where the fuck did I put that controller? Seriously, I just had it. Oh, here it is. Let's take a look at the controller. This is the controller, and this also had a rather innovative design. Believe it or not, Nintendo was always rather innovative when it came to their controllers, and the one thing that they invented with this was the D-pad. We kind of take these things for granted, but they were new back in the day. And that's another way that they said, hey, this isn't like a video game like an Atari. It doesn't have joysticks, it has controllers. The D-pads are a lot more durable than joysticks, and I like them better. It also has these two buttons, which people call the function buttons. This one's Start, which is usually used to, well, start the game, and also usually used to pause it. And this is Select, which is usually used for menus and shit, although you could always navigate menus with this thing, so this was sometimes used as an extra button in games. Like in Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, you could use it to use magic. And then we have the action buttons. It has two action buttons, which is, believe it or not, something of a novelty at the time. Most games either had only one action button, like the Atari 2600, or they had way too many, like the Atari 5200. So having two simple action buttons was a big deal, and they're labeled B and A. Every Nintendo console would have a B button and an A button. Every single Nintendo console. I always thought it was weird that the B button's here and the A button's here, but it's something that we've gotten used to, the A button being on the right and the B button being on the left. It seems to me that it would be A, B, but it's not. Well, anyway, that was a look at the NES. Join me next time, and I will show you the very first Nintendo handheld console.